uttering words of power and terror to rend both heart and stone. Thrice he cried. Thrice the great ram boomed. And suddenly upon the last stroke the gate of Gondor broke. As if stricken by some blasting spell, it burst asunder. There was a flash of searing lightning, and the doors tumbled in riven fragments to the ground. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul. Hey everyone, Yoyston here. I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today I wanted to look at an interesting and ambiguous question concerning one of our favorite Tolkienian villains. Why was the Witch King so powerful? And to further explore, I want to understand why he was so powerful even compared to the other Nazgul. Related articles and videos to further expand on this topic may be found in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. When Sauron and Celebrimbor forged the 9 rings for men in the Second Age, Sauron was strategic about which warriors, kings, and sorcerers among men he swayed to his side. We know that 3 of the 9 Nazgul were Númenóreans, and since Númenóreans were typically stronger and more powerful than the men of Middle-earth, we must therefore assume that the captain of the 9, the Witch King, was a Númenórean. What's more, it is said that some of the Nazgul were sorcerers, and Gandalf, whilst speaking to Radagast before leaving for Isengard in the Fellowship of the Ring, said that the chieftain of the 9 was a great king and sorcerer of old, who wielded a deadly fear. Thus, we must also say that the Witch King was a Númenórean sorcerer of old in the Second Age, when he was given his ring of power by Sauron, which surely augmented his abilities. With all of this established, we can see why the Witch King wielded great power, even if the definition of sorcerer is perhaps a bit ambiguous within Tolkien's works. To be honest, the whole concept of magic in Arda is a bit of a difficult topic to understand, which I delve into more in an older video, but if we can assume that the Witch King already had superhuman abilities or skills before becoming a ringwraith, especially concerning the fact he was likely a Númenórean, it would also make sense that such skills were augmented after joining Sauron, and perhaps the Witch King was also able to call and draw upon Sauron's power as well. Now, what is a bit more difficult for me to understand is why the Witch King was far more powerful than the other Nazgul, which is seen time and again throughout the Third Age, but in lesser and in greater ways. It is said in the Unfinished Tales that the Nazgul, except for the Witch King, were apt to stray while alone in daylight, and that the 9, except for the Witch King once again, feared water. These mundane differences in focus and fear still stand out as making the Witch King superior to the other 8 Nazgul. But other greater examples are out there as well, such as the Witch King growing to power and earning his name in the realm of Angmar, where the Witch King was able to grow vast armies, rally the hillmen of Rhudaur, and even send spirits into the Barrow Downs to create Barrow Wights, before going on to take Minas Ithil with the other Nazgul and make it Minas Morgul, a place of great and evil dark sorcery. Of course, it is also said of the Witch King by Glorfindel that he would not fall by the hand of man, and while that is subject to interpretation, it still shows an immense power over fate and doom that the Witch King had. And as this video begins with the quote, the Witch King also puts incantations upon Grond, allowing for the battering ram to smash open the gate of Minas Tirith. After doing that, the Witch King, who we must believe was once simply a mortal man, could actually oppose Gandalf the White at the gate directly, which would be an incredible feat for anyone who once called himself a man. And again, we don't see the other Nazgul being able to achieve anything like this. These are all things that one might expect from a wizard perhaps, but from a sorcerer among men, or even Númenóreans, turned to Sauron's cause is quite strange, especially considering the fact that no other Nazgul were able to even get close to accomplishing such feats. Perhaps the other Nazgul had skills that the Witch King didn't, and we just never saw them, but I even find that doubtful. We didn't see other powers wielded by the Nazgul enumerated within the text. They likely didn't have them. Now, let's explore some potential theories and ideas about this concerning the Witch King, although I must say I'm afraid that I may ask more questions than provide answers in this video. First, like I said before, magic in Tolkien's works is very cryptic and ambiguous, which is actually something I do quite enjoy. It leaves us with some questions, like the ones we are trying to answer here today. Usually the magic that I can more or less understand is that which is perhaps more spiritual or religious in nature. Take a look at Gandalf or Sauron, for instance. They began as Ainur and became Maiar, the servants of the Valar who were yet of the same race. Their magic seems to be far more spiritual and religious in a sense, as they have closer connections to Eru, or God, and the gods or Valar of Middle-earth. So, coming back to the Witch King, perhaps some of his dark magic, or Morgul sorcery as it is known, stems from something more spiritual in nature. Knowing that he was both a Númenorian and a sorcerer may aid us here, as perhaps those human sacrifices made to Melkor in Númenor in the late Second Age had something to do with the Witch King, if he was yet in Númenor and he was able to draw dark power from this, or from Melkor himself. Or perhaps the Witch King indeed drew upon Sauron's spiritual and dark magic in ways that other Nazgul were unable to, either by their lack of power, or by Sauron's choice to make the Witch King his champion. Indeed, if we are looking at Sauron and his augmentation of the Witch King and the Witch King alone, perhaps the Captain of the Nine's Ring had special qualities, and was even the most powerful of the 16 rings forged by Sauron and Celebrimbor, 9 for men and 7 for dwarves. This idea of drawing power from Sauron may also be examined in the context of deathlessness especially, as Sauron was once called the Necromancer of Dol Guldur, and we know that while he was in Dol Guldur, his greatest servant, the Witch King, made war with Arnor far away on the other side of the mountains. And during this time, the Witch King sent fell spirits to inhabit the old bodies of Barrow-wights in Cardolin's Barrow Downs. This feels like a very necromantic act to me, for although these spirits Angmar commanded were not necessarily the spirits of men who should have passed beyond Arda by the will of Ilúvatar, they were still evil spirits nonetheless, and it would not be surprising to learn that the Witch King was only able to command them through the powers or teachings of Sauron. What's more, Sauron prevented the ringwraiths themselves from partaking in the gift of men and passing from this world, as their rings of power held them here until the destruction of the One Ring. And we see with the Morgul blade that stabbed Frodo and almost turned him into an undying wraith as well, that this Morgul magic also had power over the fate of death, if even for a temporary time, just as it was with the Nazgul. But again, the idea of Morgul sorcery, while helmed by the Witch King at the end of the Third Age, most likely was influenced by Sauron in some way. And then if we turn our attention to the incantations of a forgotten language that the Witch King used on Grond, perhaps that forgotten language had power, perhaps that was also something that Sauron taught him, or these spells and incantations were a part of the Witch King's backstory as a sorcerer. It's really unclear, but it's interesting that he had these powers, all of these powers, while the other Nazgul did not. Ultimately, these are the ideas and theories I have regarding why the Witch King was so powerful, even amongst the other Nazgul. For he must have been the sole champion of Sauron in many ways, one who alone could draw upon greater power from the Dark Lord, either from innate power of who the Witch King was when he received his ring, or by the designs of Sauron, or both. I really couldn't see many other theories being realistic, such as any that connect him to the powers or teachings of wizards, such as the Blue Wizards in the Second Age perhaps, or anything else. It seems that, even as I make this video, many of the Witch King's powers had to have come from Sauron, or from some dark, similar realm of sorcery. It's still an ambiguous topic, shrouded in mystery, one of many in Tolkien's works, but I hope this video and commentary provided some interesting thoughts and reflections concerning the Witch King's considerable power, even amongst the Nazgul. But let me know what you all think. Why was the Witch King so powerful? Let me know in the comments below. So, we come to the end of our tale. From the power of the Witch King, we see that sometimes those who wish for evil upon others will use whatever is at their disposal to achieve such ends. And all we can do is stand against them, unfortunately. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this Middle-earth Explained video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections about the powers of the Witch King? Let me know in the comments below. Perhaps there is something I haven't considered or even missed. The Witch King is such an intriguing villain, and I do think his unknowable nature is part of such intrigue. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Adrian de la Torre, Chris Ortner, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putin, Mark Kralik, Blair Scouten, Merton, John Hume, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Ben Gardner, Kondar, Reese Jenkins, and Petrolik, Kuzan, Brandon Glidden, Molly Sullivan, and Daniel Burns. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of our patrons and YouTube members. It really means a lot. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free games today. I'll see you all again next week with a video on the love story of Sam Gamgee and Rosie Cotton for Valentine's Day. You all are the best, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.
Hello and welcome to the Broken Sword. Today we are looking at the undead-like creatures, the Barrow Wights.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
He imagined suddenly that he caught a muffled cry, and he made towards it. And even as he went forward, the mist was rolled up and thrust aside, and the starry sky was unveiled. A glance showed him that he was now facing southwards and was on a round hilltop, which he must have climbed from the north. Out of the east the biting wind was blowing. To his right there loomed against the westward stars a dark shape. A great barrow stood there. "Where are you?" he cried again, both angry and afraid.
"Here,"
said a voice, deep and cold, that seemed to come out of the ground.
"I am waiting for you."
"No," said Frodo, but he did not run away. His knees gave and he fell on the ground. Nothing happened, and there was no sound. Trembling, he looked up, in time to see a tall, dark figure like a shadow against the stars. It leaned over him. He thought that there were two eyes, very cold though, lit through a pale light that seemed to come from some remote distance. Then a grip, stronger and colder than iron, seized him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more. So first of all, happy Halloween, everybody. You may realize that this is not a usual upload day for us, but giving you something extra on a day like Halloween just seemed like a fun thing to do. And, of course, that means we need to look at something of Tolkien's works that is extra creepy, extra scary. Basically, something that fits Halloween. And that, for us today, are the Barrow Wights. So, get comfortable and come on the journey with me to discover what we can find out about these undead creatures. The Barrow Wights were spirits of pure evil. They were said to appear as a figure of shadow with barely anything but a pale, icy light shining from what should have been their eyes. Their voices were hollow and cold and very deep to match their very cold touch. Definitely something that is fitting for a horror film. These spirits were located in an area of low hills called the Barrow Downs, which was near to the Old Forest, and this is to the east of the Shire and also not far from the village of Bree, all of which we do encounter during the early events of the Fellowship of the Ring. At least in the book, as this was a large section that was cut out of the movie adaptations. And this is the area that Frodo Baggins, along with Sam, Merry and Pippin, were caught and trapped by a wight before the mysterious being Tom Bombadil came to their rescue. In fact, it was from here that the hobbits received their special blades, the daggers of Westerners, of which Merry's would be the one to finally bring down the Witch King of Agmar with. So passed the sword of the Barrow Downs, work of Westerners. But glad would he have been to know its fate who wrought it slowly long ago in the North Kingdom, when the Dunedain were young, and chief among their foes was the dread realm of Agmar and its sorcerer king. No other blade, not though mightier hands had wielded it, would have dealt that foe a wound so bitter, cleaving the undead flesh, breaking the spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will. It was Tom Bombadil who had found those daggers in the mound that the hobbits were imprisoned in and then saved from. And these daggers were created by the Dunedain of Cardolan during the time that they were at war against the Witch King of Angmar. And if you aren't sure here, Cardolan was one of the realms of Arnor after Arnor itself had been split from one kingdom into 3 realms, and these were Arthedain, Brewdower, and Cardolan. But anyway, the daggers that were found are described like the following. For each of the hobbits he chose a dagger, long, leaf-shaped, and keen, of marvellous workmanship, damasked with serpent forms in red and gold. They gleamed as he drew them from their black sheaths, wrought of some strange metal, light and strong, and set with many fiery stones. Whether by some virtue in these sheaths, or because of the spell that lay on the mound, the blades seemed untouched by time, unrusted, sharp, glittering in the sun. And also the war that I just mentioned being the war against Angmar was a war that began around the year 1272 of the Third Age and lasted until the year 1409, when the last Prince of Cardolan was laid to rest within the Barrow Downs. Some people even believe that it was the very prince's tomb where the hobbits had become trapped by the Barrow Wight. After all, as it discusses in the Unfinished Tales book, during the time of the War of the Ring, specifically in the month of September in the year 3018 of the Third Age, is when the Black Riders entered back into these lands while on their hunt for the One Ring. And at this point, their leader, the Witch King, took a trip to the Barrow Downs, and over days took the time to rouse these spirits of the Barrow Wights, as he still possessed knowledge of those lands due to those wars with the Dunedain all that time ago. And this would be just in time to be able to capture the hobbits on their journey at the end of that very same month, as the Witch King had predicted correctly that the positioning of Bree would be an important one. And I'd actually like to pause here for just a moment to ask you all a quick question. Would you like a video on the wars with Angmar? If so, leave me a comment of War with Angmar in the comment section below to show that there is interest. But anyway, this may also make you wonder though, if this land had once been a part of a realm where great men of the Dunedain had once lived, then how did this then become a place of such evil and terror? Well, quite simply, because of the Witch King. The war between this servant of Sauron and these great men was, well, legendary, and by the end of it, after the Witch King came out as the winner after establishing himself from his great dark fortress of Carn Dûm, which was located at the western end of the mountains of Angmar, the Witch King sent out evil spirits to enter into those mounds and dwell there. And this was meant to be as an act of complete disrespect and warning to the Dunedain. The Wights were sent so that they could haunt the hills of their dead, attempting to prevent any attempts of the Dunedain to ever try and resettle here again. After all, the idea of burying the greatest dead in these mounds was a tradition that had lived long through the ages, all the way back to the first age of Middle-earth in fact. It is said that the mounds of Tirn Gorthad, as the Barrow Downs were called of old, are very ancient, and that many were built in the days of the old world of the First Age by the forefathers of the Edain, before they crossed the Blue Mountains into Beleriand, of which Lindon is all that now remains. Those hills were therefore revered by the Dunedain after their return, and there many of their lords and kings were buried. Some say that the mound of which the ring-bearer was imprisoned had been the grave of the last Prince of Cardolan, who fell in the war of 1409. So, looking at all of this, it shows that it was all down to the Witch King as to how these beings came to exist in this area, and this plan was truly successful. After all, when Arthedain had once more claimed the kingship over all of Arnor, the Dunedain once tried to re-enter these lands and set up a colony again, but due to the Barrow Wights, this was a task that they had to abandon. And now also on a side note here, this may bring up the question with you as well. If the Witch King had this power, did the other 8 of the 9 also possess this ability? Well, to put it simply, it is almost certain that they did not. After all, Sauron, for whatever reason, spent a lot more of his power into the improvement of the Witch King as their Nazgul Lord. Sauron spent countless years pumping more and more knowledge, powers and abilities to this one being, and this, after all, is why he was so important to the Dark Lord. The Witch King ended up with abilities of sorcery which led him to be able to create weapons just like the Morgul Blade, have an effect on the weather around him, and even be more resistant to the effects of sunlight and water. He very much stood head and shoulders above all of the other 8 Nazgul. Maybe that could be down to the king that he may have once been before he became a wraith, or something else entirely. We will never truly know why. Now, after that little sidetrack though, let's make sure I'm clear. Did the Witch King send the Wights to the Barrow Downs? Yes. Did he create the Wights himself? No. We have to remember that creation and corruption are very much different things in Tolkien's works, and having power over something does not mean you also have the power to create it. Now, I hope I didn't really lose anyone with that and you understand where I'm coming from. And that basically sums everything up for us at this point in an obviously quite frustrating way. How were the Barrow Wights initially created? Well, technically we do not know, but how do they come to exist in the Barrow Downs? Well, that was due to the devilry of the Witch King of Agmar corrupting some kind of being and sending them down to occupy those graves in those downs. So basically, with a lot of the evil beings of Tolkien's work, it all comes down to corrupting something that was once good into a mockery of that thing as evil. And now to finish off, I'd like to give you all one more quote, and I know this video has perhaps been a little quote heavy, but it has felt more needed for this subject. But this one is from The Lord of the Rings, as it will lead me on to my question for you all today. So, suddenly a song began, a cold murmur rising and falling. The voice seemed far away and immeasurably dreary, sometimes high in the air and thin, sometimes like a low moan from the ground. Out of the formless stream of sad but horrible sounds, strings of words would now and again shape themselves, grim, hard, cold words, heartless and miserable. The night was railing against the morning of which it was bereaved, and the cold was cursing the warmth for which it hungered. Frodo was chilled to the marrow. After a while the song became clearer, and with dread in his heart he perceived that it had changed into an incantation. Cold be hand and heart and bone, and cold be sleep under stone. Never more to wake on stony bed, never till the sun fails and the moon is dead. In the black wind the stars shall die, and still on gold here let them lie, till the Dark Lord lifts his hand over dead sea and withered land. And so, this leads me on to my question for you all today, and that is, from everything that we have heard, as after all it is not known if these evil spirits were anything like perverted beings, like that of evil men, or even maybe something more powerful, but what is your favourite theory as to how these things came to be? After all, from that last quote of their incantation, there must be some, however slight, memory of the warmth, of sunlight and of freedom. So does that hint at some kind of history of a being we may have met in the past? Let me know all of your thoughts, opinions, theories, anything at all in the comment section below. And now, to finish off this Halloween video, it's time to shout out our patrons, with firstly our Divine Power tier members of Kevin, Abram, Matt and Glorfindel of Gondolin. You are all awesome. And a big thanks to our Fire Demon tier members of Nashith, Denversteel and Gregory, and as well I cannot forget the Wizard Staff tier members of John, Andrew and Pirate747. Every single one of you is a true legend of the Brohirrim. Finally, thank you if you have managed to reach the very end of this video with me today. Please remember to do all the stuff like the video, leave a comment on it if you enjoyed it. I hope this extra upload was a fun one for you all, and happy Halloween. So thank you once again, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.
In Lord of the Rings, Tolkien tells a story of many heroes. Sam and Frodo bring the One Ring as close to its doom as possible. They went further with it than most other beings of Middle-earth would be able to. Bilbo found the One Ring, helped the dwarves, which led to Smaug's defeat, and later even abandoned the ring with a little help of Gandalf, an unimaginable feat of willpower. Speaking of Gandalf, he positioned characters at the right places over the centuries and took actions against all odds to force Sauron to move. If he would have failed, all would be lost. All those stories we can read in the books and see in the films, but there are other heroes, often forgotten. Today we look at an elf in the background, and that is literally where you can see him in the film. They show him only twice and completely ignore his story, even though nobody had his foresight in Middle-earth. Would he have failed, all would be lost too. He fought with many kings over the ages in the great battles that would be sung later. For example, he fought with the last alliance of elves and men. We can see his banner in the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring movie, a nice little reference. But he also fought 3,400 years prior with the first leaders of men, or the Edain to be precise. He gave advice to the powerful and worked tirelessly in the backgrounds against all odds. He is probably one of the oldest elves, if not the oldest, living in Middle-earth, so old that he had a long beard. He was brave and loyal, bringing great sacrifices for the greater good. He truly is an unsung hero and one of my favorite characters in Tolkien's universe. It's Círdan, the shipwright. Before we continue, 2 hints. I try to pronounce the names as Tolkien described it, or as it makes sense looking at the roots of the word. This means a lot of rolled R's. To explain Círdan and his early story, I have to explain a ton of Elvish lore from the First Age. This video could almost be titled The History of the Teleri and Noldor Elves, but I take several shortcuts and let out some parts to bring the focus back to Círdan. But the First Age is very complex and all events are somehow connected. It must also be mentioned that I focus on Tolkien's mythology from his main works. As mentioned, Círdan is actually shown in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. He is played by Michael Ellsworth, who also played this guy in the archives of Minas Tirith. However, we see Círdan at the beginning wearing Narya, one of the 3 elven rings of power, together with Galadriel and the High King of the Noldor Elves, Gil-galad. And we see him at the end of Return of the King in Mithlond, the Grey Havens, together with Galadriel and her husband Celeborn, like a frame for the movies, which does him justice. However, the movies depict him without a beard. Male elves usually don't have one, but when they are very old and in their late life cycle, some speak of the 3rd life cycle, they can grow a beard, which was the case for Círdan. In the Return of the King, we can read, as they came to the gates, Círdan the shipwright came forth to greet them. Very tall he was, and his beard was long, and he was grey and old, save that his eyes were keen as stars. But this is the end of the Lord of the Rings at the Grey Havens. Where does it all start? Círdan was born as Norwe between the years of the trees 1050 and 1149, so between the awakening of the elves and him staying in Middle-earth after the Great Journey. He could potentially be part of the small group of the first elves in existence. That makes him very old, and far older than even Galadriel, who was born years of the trees 1362. If you have seen my video about the White Trees and their origins, you know that this is ancient. The years of the trees are also not solar years, but Valian years. So 9.582 solar years are 1 Valian year. If we calculate his age, he is between 10,412 and 11,361 solar years old when Frodo reaches Rivendell. Galadriel is only 8,371 at this time in comparison. If you ask yourself why he's described looking old as an elf, he lived in Middle-earth his whole recorded life and has never seen the light of Aman, the Undying Land. Galadriel, in contrast, lived in Aman for some time and has seen the light of the 2 trees. In addition, the other known elves in Middle-earth are much younger. Middle-earth is a continent of change. Aman is not, which is why it's called the Undying Land. At least that's my interpretation. All elves must at some point go there, or they fade into the unseen world. But let's continue. Nove was kin to Olwe and Elwe, who should later become King Thingol. Elwe and Olwe were also born in Cuiviene, where the elves awoke. They led the great journey for the Teleri elves, so it is possible that Círdan was already alive at this time too. But let me explain the great journey of the elves a bit from the lore's perspective. I have to take some shortcuts though. Cuivienen was a bay at the shores of the Sea of Elkar that is interestingly around where Mordor is during the 3rd age of the Years of the Sun, a bit further to the east, so behind Mordor. In Tolkien's mythology, the world was shaped differently at this time, and also had changed from its original design by Eru Ilúvatar, that is God, his high angels, the Valar, and probably to some degree his lower angels, the Maiar, because of the rebellious nature of the evil Valar Melkor, the master of Sauron from ancient times. Originally, the world just had one symmetrical continent and 2 lamps on giant towers as light source called Illuin and Ormal. The Sea of Elkar is the crater where Illuin collapsed after Melkor destroyed the 2 lamps. The crater filled with water and formed a sea, and here the elves awoke at the mentioned bay. As mentioned, Sauron's master Melkor, who should later be known as Morgoth, is the main reason behind the Great Journey. When the elves awoke, he found them first and started to corrupt them. When the other Valar found the elves through Orome, the huntsman of the Valar, They were worried and needed to get the elves away from Melkor's influence and stop it. And so they started and won the war for sake of the elves against Melkor, which bound him for 3 ages and destroyed his first stronghold Udun in the north. When the powerful entities clashed, the Darkland separated from Middle-earth south, where the other great lamp Ormal once collapsed. After the war, the Valar invited the elves to their undying lands on their continent, Aman, in the far west. Depending on their, you could say, clans, the elves split into 3 groups: Vanyar, Noldor and Teleri. We know many Noldor elves from The Lord of the Rings, like Gil-galad, Galadriel and Elrond, but also some Teleri and related elves like Círdan, Thranduil and Celeborn, who are Sindar elves to be precise. There are likely no Vanyar elves in Middle-earth. The Valar Orome took 1 ambassador from each group, namely Ingwe, Finwë and the mentioned Elwë, and brought them to Valinor, the capital of the Valar on Aman, to speak for their people at the Council of the Valar. After they returned to their people and convinced them to leave, the great journey begins. That means all 3 groups of elves will travel to Aman, which is a long journey through Middle-earth and over the ocean. Just for sake of completeness, there were also elves among the Noldor and Teleri elves who did not want to go on the great journey. They will be known as the Avari, which means the refusers. Sometimes they are also called Dark Elves, but this term has some different meanings. They will have a problematic relationship with the Noldor and Sindar later. I'm coming to what Sindar elves are soon. However, parts of the Avari mixed with the Nandor elves, that are the Sylvan and Green elves. For example, the people of Thranduil, even though he is a Sindar himself, are Sylvan elves. Originally, the Nandor elves were a group of Teleri elves who aborted the great journey around the Anduin and stayed there, but the story is far more complicated and is probably for another video, only mentioned here to confuse you more. The great journey of the 3 main groups slowly moved through Middle-earth and halted when they finally reached the west coastland of Middle-earth, called Beleriand. They were a bit afraid of the ocean and even moved back a bit into the land. Still, they had to cross the ocean, but how should they bring so many elves over to Aman? The Valar had an interesting solution for this. They used an island as a giant ship, which they separated from another local island, Balar. The island would be later known as Tol Eressëa and was pushed by the Valar Ulmo, king of the sea. He is like Poseidon. Not all elves could be transported on the island the first time, because the Teleri still dwelled in the east of Beleriand, so they did not hear the summon to come to the island and missed it. The events around this, described in the Silmarillion, are a bit difficult to put into a chronological order, so this is my interpretation of it. The reason for this is that different views on the stories are split into different chapters, which tell the same story again but with other details. They all tell the same story, but with some parts it's not clear in what chronological order they happen. For example, Elwë wanted to visit Finwë, but it's not stated when exactly this happened. I assume when the Vanyar and Noldor fell back into the land and before they were summoned to the floating island. Tolkien wanted to create mythology told from the perspective of a translator who found fictional records. Elements like this are imitating the real world. Even in history, there are sometimes different sources or recordings of the same event with small differences. What is important, around this time Elwë, the leader of the Teleri, went to visit his close friend Finwë, the leader of the Noldor elves, but went missing in the woods, and the Teleri started to search for him for a very long time.